Hi guys, welcome to our birds lesson. And here are two examples of two different sizes of birds. Here you have the smallest bird on earth, which is the bee hummingbird found here. And you can see in comparison to the finger how little it is. And then here is the largest bird. This is an ostrich, is the current largest bird in the world. But there used to be a 12-foot bird which is also related to the ostrich family. You can see the similarities. This lived in Europe about 2 million years ago. Some interesting characteristics of birds. So you notice here that there is a common ancestor between reptiles and birds. And if you notice how this cladogram is drawn, reptiles and birds are some of the closest organisms that are closely related. Some characteristics that you find on birds is that they have amniotic egg, and we already discussed what that is. And they are in their skin covering, instead of having scales and whatnot, they have feathers. They actually, I think, have scales too. But they have feathers, and these feathers serve two main purposes. The first one is warmth, and the second one is flight. And so we're going to talk in more detail about these two things. So some of the birds' adaptations that are important to know. So the first thing is birds are endoderms, and this is the first mammal to be an endoderm. We've been discussing the other animals are not, and so endoderms are able to basically exercise or warm themselves up based on activity level. So notice here you have a reptile, and you notice that this is the temperature in the environment, and the reptile matches the temperature in the environment. Here is a temperature here's a picture of a bird measuring temperature. The black is the environment, which is very, very cold, and you notice that the birds are typically staying within a range of warmth. So this is very similar, the other animals like mammals and birds are going to have this ability, right? The other thing is that their temperature is going to be more stable, meaning even though you see there's some cooler areas, like in your body, for example, your fingers may be cold, or your feet may get cold, and they get a few degrees colder, it's still within a pretty consistent temperature range. Why is this important? Well, this means that birds, because of their flight and their activity, they are able to fly and do a lot of exercise. When they fly, it actually requires a lot of energy, and that allows them to warm up. Also, because they're able to control their own temperature, they're able to control the making of ATP. Remember, ATP is the energy that organisms need to survive, and ATP gets produced faster the warmer you are. In other words, the more your body temperature goes up, the more ATP has to be generated to keep up with the activity or the processing of ATP. So this way, birds are going to need a lot of ATP to fly, and this is important that they're endoderms, because then they can control how much ATP is being made. Most chemical reactions in the body or otherwise become more active the warmer it is. So you're going to learn that in chemistry in 2 years. You're going to learn in this unit that birds were perfectly designed, their adaptations, to be able to fly. And this is the first one of the adaptations. Another characteristic that allows birds to fly is their bone structure. Here is a human bone, and notice that this human bone is very compact and has a lot of density to it. If you were to take a bird bone and measure it for humans, we would be breaking our bones all the time. But birds need to have lightweight bones, so they have these holes in them that basically makes them look like a honeycomb look that allows to make the bones a lot lighter for them to be able to fly. The next adaptation that you have is they have these lungs that have air sacs. Now, they have a centralized lung here, but you notice there's an air sac here, an air sac here. There's all these air sacs. Now, this design of all these additional storage of air is important because if you have to make ATP to fly, you need oxygen. And with our lungs, if we exercise too much, we go into fermentation. Remember, we run out of oxygen and then we start the fermentation process, lactic acid fermentation. Birds cannot afford to go into lactic acid fermentation. They could fall down and crash if they don't have the ATP necessary to be able to support flight. So now they have much more oxygen availability. They have all these sacs that hold oxygen that allows them to be constantly making ATP so that they can support their flight. That's why it's important. They have a 4-chamber heart. Now, we have not been talking much about hearts, but certain animals have a 2-chamber heart. I think you guys saw some models of 2-chamber hearts before for some of the organisms, which means that the blood goes in and then it goes out with oxygen throughout the entire body, and it just goes in one circular motion. There are also 3-chamber hearts where you have oxygen coming in, oxygen coming out, and then oxygen coming in here, and then oxygen coming out. And this is not, this is also, some organisms have that, but the most effective model is what birds and humans have, and it's a 4-chamber heart, where you have a constant access to blood going in both chambers and going out with oxygen in them. And so it allows to remember that your heart basically carries oxygen to the rest of the body. So in this case, you have to spend a little bit more time, or in this case, your heart it's going to take them longer to distribute oxygen throughout because there aren't as many chambers. In this case, there are a lot more chambers that can carry oxygen, and that's important because the oxygen is what allows you to make more ATP. And the last characteristic that makes birds good for flight and to make other decisions is their brain. They have a much larger brain compared to the rest of the body. Look at the size of the human brain. Look at the size of a bird brain. Look at the similarities with the way that the brain is distributed and the masses that it has. They have a cerebrum, a thalamus, a midbrain, and a hindbrain like we do. And this allows them, in the cerebellum, so it allows them to process information, make decisions, and remember, which makes them very, very important organisms. Very smart organisms. Why is this important in flight? In flight, they have to make decisions. It's sometimes in the last minute, but there's a lot of coordination. Remember that your brain is in charge of your coordination. So how coordinated you are has to do with how your brain processes information. Birds have to be extremely coordinated and have to make extreme complex movements to turn, decide if they can fit through places, if they have to drop down quickly or fly up high. All those decisions are controlled by the brain. So they need a very large brain to do that. Here is a video about
Can I stay in here?
Absolutely, you can sit and watch.
Right.
We'll see what happens.
Come on then. Send in your mastermind because it's going to need that.
Alex studies wild birds, which he releases after 3 months of research. This one is nicknamed 007, and it's about to attempt what Alex believes is one of the most complex tests of the animal mind ever constructed. The bird is familiar with the individual objects, but this is the first time he's seen them arranged like this. 8 separate stages that must be completed in a specific order if the puzzle is to be solved. And if the bird succeeds, it'll be a world first. He takes time to have a look and then starts with the short stick. Stage 1. He finds it's too short to reach the food. He then sets off to get the first stone. But he drops it. And another. He seems to be stuck. But then something seems to click. He deploys the first stone. And then another. Got it. The 8th and final stage. Success. 8 individual stages of one complex puzzle completed. That was remarkable.
So you notice in this case, the bird was able to make all those decisions to get the snack that it wanted and succeeded at it. All right, some other ways that we can look at birds and identify some of their adaptations and environments. So, and you guys looked at fish and looked at different qualifiers for fish based on their environment. So we're gonna do the same for beaks. In this case, you can look at these two beaks and you can see that this beak is curved versus this is long and thin beak. So this is an osprey, and osprey eats, they eat large organisms that they have to catch with their beak and then tear apart and shred. And so they need a very sharp hook-like beak to do that. This is a willet, and these willets live in the beach. You've probably seen them, and they basically get worms and other types of arthropods, and so they just need more of a narrow looking beak so that they can access either deep depths of the sand or maybe more like crooks in stone or rock or things like that to access smaller organisms. Here's again 2 other types of birds. You have a cardinal. I have a lot of these in my yard. They eat a lot of seeds, and so they have a small but very powerful beak that can crack through nuts. And you have here a woodpecker, and woodpeckers like to make holes on trees and also eat a lot of different organisms that require them to have a long range of a beak to access. And they also make these, holes on trees, and so they need a powerful, narrow beak to be able to do that. And then finally, you have hummingbird here. And these hummingbirds, basically, they eat nectar. I have a few of these in my yard.